Welcome back to the show, my friends. Today is a very special episode. I'm going to be introducing you all to something that has changed my life in a very profound way, and that's the concept of Stoicism. I've brought it up a lot on this podcast, but it's time for me to dig into the backstory and give you an idea of how you can apply things to your life and start living more of a Stoic life. Without further ado, let's jump in. What is Stoicism? I talk about it all the time, and if you are a regular on this podcast, you understand that because I probably mention it at least once a episode. And it's an interesting concept because a lot of people mistake Stoicism for many different things. They think it's all about people who don't feel things. They don't feel their emotions. They don't give themselves time to actually be a human. But Stoicism's quite the opposite of that. I think it's something that, if applied correctly to your life, can really bring benefit. And there's this quote from Seneca, who's one of the famous Stoics. We'll talk about 4 of the famous Stoics in this podcast, but he says this. He goes, "This is the first promise that philosophy holds out to us: fellow feeling, humanity, and sociability." And if that doesn't sound like allowing yourself to feel emotions and anything in that sense, then I don't know what does. So what is Stoicism really about? In my opinion, it's about understanding our emotions and not necessarily getting rid of them. It's about using our feelings in a good way and as fuel. Because when good or bad things happen to anyone in life, there's always an opportunity to either give in to that feeling and to ruminate on it, to let it control you, or on the contrary, you can use it to fuel your life. And it's why I have the word good tattooed on my bicep. Because of the video of Jocko. There's this video that I play in my head quite often, but I played it every day when I was sick. And Jocko just talks about good. Like, find the good in everything that you can, because there is something. And he brings up a couple examples. He says, lost your job? Good. More time to get better. Didn't get that job you wanted? Good. You can find something else that you're interested in. Didn't make it to the gym? Good. Figure out what you can do to not let that happen next time. But basically, there's an opportunity to look at any circumstance as good or bad. And you can call it optimism. You can call it realism. But I like Stoicism because, like Seneca says, it should teach us how to feel our feelings, how to be more human, and how to be more social. So Stoicism at its core is not about suppressing our emotions. It's about mastering them. And I used to think Stoicism was about toughing it out. But then I discovered, through reading Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, he talks a lot about love, grief, and even joy. And in my opinion, if you're feeling those things, you're not necessarily toughing it out. You might be strong and you might be able to push through difficulties better, but you're not toughing it out, so to speak. And so that little idea changed everything. And to get into the background of Stoicism, I'm going to share where it actually came from, how Stoicism began. And I pulled some information from Ryan Holiday, who's a modern day Stoic. I took a class from him, and this is how he introduced the whole topic of Stoicism. So it's a little bit of a story, but buckle up. I think there's a lot that we can learn from this. So let's begin. Late in the 4th century BC, the Phoenician merchant Zeno set sail on the Mediterranean. His ship was laden with precious Tyrrhenian purple dye. Now, back then, dye, purple specifically, was really hard to come by. What they would have to do is extract the blood of sea snails, put it on a rock, and they put the blood on a rock and let it dry under the sun. And this was so rare, this type of dye, that it always adorned only the wealthy and the royal, and they wore it as a symbol of status. And you might have heard the phrase before, like, don't allow yourself to be dyed purple, which is if you come into power, if you come into wealth, don't allow that to become who you are, because if you remove those things, then you're going to be fighting some identity issues. Like if the markets crash or you lose your position of power, whatever that might look like, don't get dyed purple. And so Zeno is carrying this, he's carrying this ship full of this dye. Okay, so this really rare dye. And as one ancient historian put it, this dye was worth its weight in silver. So for Zeno, this trade was his family's lifeblood. And trafficking in one of the most valuable commodities of the ancient world. Like all entrepreneurs, they lived at the mercy of fortune. Yet theirs was a business bound to the unpredictable sea, a risk that they understood on a daily basis. The sea, you can't control it. It's so powerful. And one fateful day, Zeno's ship met disaster. And it could have been a storm, or it might have been they ran into a reef. We don't necessarily know the details. But we do know that the ship was lost, along with its entire cargo. And as you can imagine, Zeno was devastated, not only financially, but also physically and emotionally at this time. Everything he had was literally swallowed up by the sea. So when he finally got to Athens, he found himself, in the heart of where all the intellects are. And in this very city is where Socrates had lived and died just a century earlier. So he's wandering through the city. Zeno comes across a bookseller, and using some of his remaining coins, he bought a book on Socrates, and he read its entire contents and soon found himself back at that same bookseller, asking again, are there still men like this here in Athens, and where can I find them? And the bookseller said, or he pointed him towards Crates, who at the time was a well-known philosopher passing through the town. So Zeno rushed up, he introduced himself to him, and set out to dedicate himself to practicing this kind of philosophy. Anyways, so after reading about the life of Socrates and learning from the philosophers who carried on his legacy in Athens specifically, sorry, I lost my spot. So anyways, he's reading all these things and he's learning from all these philosophers. And that shipwreck could have easily been the end of Zeno's story, but the loss, it could have led him to, be the town drunk or worse. But he instead decided from the lessons of Stoicism to live a quiet, ordinary life in the service of others. And he set in motion the creation of Stoicism, which is one of the greatest intellectual and you can call it philosophical movements in history. And this is what Zeno later says. He said, I made a prosperous voyage when I suffered shipwreck. And I think that's kind of interesting. But if you think about it, his legacy was no longer, I'm going to be so good at selling this dye. It was now completely up to him on what he was going to do with his life. And Zeno's whole story tells us that you can't control the disasters that life will throw at you. But one thing you can control is how you respond to them. With courage or cowardice, or not at all. Like, this is all entirely up to you. So, rather than returning to his business, Zeno found himself in his own school of philosophy. He gathered a group of students to discuss, debate, and support each other. And eventually they became known as Zenonians. Even though he didn't want them to carry that name because he was very humble, but pretty much that's how Stoicism began. Because one man, back in the day, you can say, in ancient times, he came across tragedy, and because of that, had the decision to either give in or to make a difference in his life and use it as an opportunity to grow. So what does it mean to be a Stoic? Stoicism in its essence is not about suppressing emotions, but it's about understanding them, more like regulating them, I would say. A Stoic doesn't seek to eliminate emotions, but a Stoic seeks to control them and use them to his favor. So because a Stoic is not at the whim of every urge and impulse and knee-jerk reaction that a lot of us are victim to now, they know how to use their emotions. And oftentimes, one thing that I think about is the 2-second pause before you react to something. This has been a strategy that's helped me, at least, just learn a little bit more about myself and also make better decisions. And that is when things happen to you, good or bad in life, just take 2 seconds, pause before you react. And that could be you're on the freeway, someone cuts you off, take 2 seconds before you call that guy a piece of S. Like, oftentimes that's not the case. And I think this is an interesting definition of Stoicism from a modern day Stoic. His name's Nassim Taleb. He says a Stoic transforms fear into prudence, pain into information, mistakes into initiation, and desire into undertaking. And so each of those times, fear gets turned into prudence, pain gets turned into information, so you try and understand. Mistakes get turned into intention, and desire into undertaking. And I think a big chunk of practicing this is you have to do it every single day. Not like terrible things are not going to happen to you on a daily basis. At least I hope not. If they are, I sincerely apologize for that. But life is not fair to many of us. And so when those times where you feel like life is a little bit unfair, try to figure out what you need to learn in those moments. It's one reason why I do love my faith is we are taught that when we pass through trials, when we pass through tribulations and difficulties in this life, when things don't go our way, we are taught to learn from them. Figure out what you need to learn to get through the situation, and then you'll be better because of it in the end. And that is something I firmly believe everyone can apply to their own life. It doesn't matter who you are. There's always something to be learned in any given situation. No matter how bleak it might seem, no matter how overwhelming it might be in the moment. And something I think about a lot is when I was sick. I talk about it quite a bit on this podcast, but it's something I'm very passionate about because that taught me a lot of lessons about, there's sometimes you can't control what happens to you in life. And it's much better to try and find the beauty in every circumstance. And during that time when I was sick and I thought I was dying, I will say I made incredible memories with my family. I spent a lot of time with them, and that's something I don't think I'll ever regret. And I don't think I'll ever look back on and be remorseful for, because even though I was sick, at least I had this opportunity to spend time with my parents and my brothers and my sister, and I had a lot of time to spend with them. And now as life gets more busy, like that's not necessarily a realistic situation to be in again. And so instead of reacting negatively, falling into the trap of depression and everything in that sense, I tried to make the most of it, and things turned out better. So just think about that when you are going through a challenge. Don't shy away from it. Instead, ask yourself, what do I need to learn? And turn that fear into prudence, that pain, turn it into information that you can use to learn, to grow, to get better. And I love David Goggins' quote on failure, and that is, he doesn't look at failure as failure. He looks at them as attempts. And that is a hard mindset to master, but one that can get you anywhere in life, because I'm a victim of this. I let failure dictate how I think about myself, how I view myself. But I should be celebrating myself when I fail, because at least I gave it a shot. And many people don't even do that. And so if you're going through life and you feel like you're meeting failure, back to back to back, that doesn't mean you are one. that means you're in a era of learning and growth. And it shouldn't be so overwhelming and daunting that it doesn't allow you to keep going. It stalls your growth. Instead, it should push you to be better and to push you to be better and learn about yourself a little bit more. So instead of reacting emotionally when things happen, just take a moment to pause. There's a lot of power in that. Now, I just want to briefly talk about a couple famous Stoics, Marcus Aurelius being the first, because I think he's probably the most famous. He has a book called Meditations where it's kind of cool. He wrote in his journal with no intention of ever publishing it. Someone found it when he died and turned it into Meditations, the book. But it's interesting because everything that he talks about is all about wisdom and humility. And he was a Roman emperor. So people looked at him as a god. And it's why he hired someone to walk behind him and say, "You are a man. You are a man." He hired a slave to walk behind him. When people were praising him, the slave would say, "You are a man. Remember, you're a man." And I love that. Like, that's a huge lesson for all of us. But Marcus Aurelius teaches us that leadership is about serving others and not necessarily dominating them. Because if you look at other Roman emperors, a lot of them were very brutal, and Caesar being one of them. But they let themselves be dyed purple. They felt that power, that wealth, and let it get to their head a little bit. And not Marcus, though. In one of his famous quotes that he says is, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." So think about that. And on the complete opposite side of a Roman emperor, we find Epictetus, who he was a former slave, and he taught that true freedom comes from within. And when I heard this, I instantly thought of Jocko's teachings of discipline equals freedom. Basically, if you do the hard thing now, you will feel better in the end. And this former slave is trying to teach us that true freedom comes from learning, and focusing on what you can control and letting go of what you can't. Because there's a lot of things that are going to happen to us that we can't control, and they are going to suck to go through. I can almost guarantee that. But don't let it ruin who you think you are. Because each of these philosophers, they all faced immense challenges. No Stoic was subject to them. But their lives showed how you can apply Stoic principles to navigate adversity with grace and with purpose, instead of feeling like the weight of the world is too heavy to carry and you're just going to give up. Because that is when you actually fail, is when you give up. If you're going from failure to failure, looking at them as attempts rather than actually failing, then you will have a better mindset and you will go farther in life with a more logical mindset in that sense. Winston Churchill, my boy, has this quote that says, "Success is going from failure to failure without the loss of enthusiasm." The Stoics are teaching us the same thing here. You might be asking yourself, how can Stoicism help me today? What can I be doing to start? And the first thing I'm going to tell you is journal. Journal your thoughts and maybe your actions throughout the day, each night. The only way that you're going to understand your emotions is if you try to understand yourself. And journaling has been the best example for that for me today. So what does that look like for you? It could be you just write about what went well, what didn't go well, and what you can do better tomorrow. Just start there. Ask yourself some questions. Like, ask yourself, what is my relationship with failure? And then write about it. Because only through doing the work will we actually understand how we think about issues when they come up. And there's a lot of power in knowing yourself, knowing your identity. It's been on my mind quite a bit, but you have to know that you are made for more. And journaling is a great way to start. And this next one I think is interesting, but you need to visualize the negative. There's a lot of power in visualization, like seeing yourself succeed, seeing yourself go through the hardships. But what I want to tell you is try and imagine the worst case scenarios so you can prepare emotionally for it. Like if you are interviewing for a job, or if you're working in a company and you don't feel like you're doing well, then visualize yourself losing that job and think of how you would react and respond to it. But that helps you build resilience and gratitude for what you have now also. Because if you're thinking about the worst case scenario, then you have to understand that that can't be as bad as your life in its current state. And if your life is so bad that you can't imagine a worst case scenario, then change. And I know it's hard to hear that, but a lot of our circumstances in life are because of our actions and our choices. And sometimes that means we need to make a change in our life, and we need to develop our own skills to become who we know that we can be. A lot of that is visualizing the negative. Like, what if things go wrong? It's something I always think about because I talk about running and how much I love it and how it's such an outlet for me. Is what if that was taken away from me? What if I got injured? What if I was in a car accident and I needed to get my leg amputated? That would be hell for me for a moment. I think what shows a true example of character is if I was to lose my leg, if I couldn't run anymore, then the character that I talk about, the character that I know that I have, expects me to find something else. Because if I take the Lieutenant Dan approach, which if you're not familiar with that reference, Forrest Gump, there's a scene where a lieutenant he's fighting with in Vietnam gets his legs blown up and he's bound to a wheelchair for the rest of his life. But he's saved by Forrest and he's like, I don't want to live. Like, leave me here. But Forrest just picks him up and takes him. And then anyways, he's pissed off for the rest of his life until he starts like making money with Bubba Gump Shrimp and all this. But anyways, he was very negative until good things started to happen to him. And there's more power, in my opinion, is if you're going through something difficult, to try and find the good in that situation. So if I did lose my leg, I'd probably get really damn good at rowing. Like that, I don't know. I feel like I'd be really good at that. I could get a prosthetic and I could start biking. Like, there's options out there. And because thinking about those things, thinking about the worst case scenario, I sure as hell hope they don't happen. But if they do, like, I will come out stronger on the end. And that's what Stoicism promises, is if you take some of these principles, you apply them to your life, you will be stronger, you will be better in the end. Now, this next piece, we're going to get into running a little bit, so bear with me if you are tired of hearing me talk about it, but there's immense value in it. Voluntary discomfort. So practicing small hardships that help you build that same resilience. I love working out first thing in the morning. And no, let me take that back. I actually don't love working out first thing in the morning. It's always hard for me, like waking up, getting out of bed, going to the gym, or going on a run. It doesn't matter. It's a difficult thing to push through sometimes. But what I love is that I get the hardest part of my day out right away. Like, nothing I do will be harder than a hour and a half run or a heavy lifting session. At least physically, nothing will be harder than that. But it allows me to push through the pain when I'm lifting something heavy, or push through the pain when I'm on mile 8 of 10, because then I know I can push through difficult situations when they come up at work, or if someone in my family needs me and I need to, put everything that I plan for the day aside for a second to go help them. I'm not saying you have to work out or run, but practice some kind of voluntary discomfort. Put yourself in the way of adversity willingly. That could look like fasting for a day, or it could be taking a cold shower, getting in a cold plunge, trying something new. But do something that's not comfortable for you, because resilience gets overlooked as a valuable trait for one to have. Resilience teaches you that the end is not the end and that you can bounce back if your mindset allows. So try it. Try and do something difficult that you wouldn't typically do and see what it tells you about yourself. Are you going to, complain the whole time, or what is that going to look like for you? And since we are talking a little bit about running, and this is my podcast and I can do what I want on it, I'm going to read this. I saw it on a TikTok, but it's basically this like little slideshow of reasons why people, like this guy's sitting there and his friend asked him about running. He's like, why do you love running? And this is what he says. And I think it's super interesting. So these are screenshots. It's not necessarily a quote, but it said this. It's a conversation with discomfort. Every run, there's a point where your body starts to protest. The ache in your legs, shortness of breath, the voice telling you to stop. Discomfort shows up like an old rival, waiting to see if you'll back down. It's all about negotiating with it. When discomfort shows up, you have two choices: ignore it and keep going blindly, or listen to what it's telling you. It forces you to ask yourself, is it a limit or is it a hurdle? Every step beyond that discomfort is like saying, I know you're there, but you don't decide my limits. That's good. That is good. The discomfort's going to be there, but don't allow it to decide your limits. The last thing I'll tell you that you can apply Stoicism to your life right away is focus on what you can control. Now, the Stoics had a dichotomy of control. They would focus only on their actions and let go of outcomes. So, another example of this could be if you're interviewing for that job, then prepare as much as you can for the interview, but accept that the decision isn't in your hands. You could do your best work. You could prepare so long, and you want this job so bad, but understand that you're not going to be the decision maker of it. So let go of the outcome, but focus on what you can control. And if you're preparing for those interviews, your odds are going to be better than if you don't. So the key takeaway here is Stoicism isn't just for philosophers. You don't have to grow a beard. You don't have to go read books or write in your journal all day long and turn off your phone. No. It's a practical tool for anyone who wants to live with more clarity, with more courage and control in their own life. Stoicism doesn't make you any less human. It helps you become a better one. And I know that if you apply these things to your life, you will see yourself succeed in ways that you never thought were possible. Because again, Stoicism is about mastering your emotions and taking control of what you can. The whole entire history of Stoicism provides lessons for resilience and wisdom and teaches you about yourself. Because isn't that one thing that we're asked to do in this life is to work on ourselves so we can be a better human, so we can leave the world a little bit better for those that are coming next, for our own kids, for those around us. I guarantee you, if you practice these Stoic exercises daily, your life can improve today. So what I would say is start small. Tonight, reflect on the challenge that life has presented to you in this moment. Reflect on the challenges you're facing. And then ask yourself, what can I control and what can't I control? From there, you need to just focus on your actions and let go of the rest. This is why I think journaling could help, just so you can get your thoughts out on paper and allow yourself to see how you think. And I am no expert in Stoicism. I am not a Ryan Holiday or a Nassim Taleb. I'm not one of those people, but I am Brett Rossell. And I have a firm belief that the lessons Stoicism has taught me so far have improved my life in ways that I haven't even understood yet. And it can do the same to you. So start today, start small, and your life will get better. And let me know how it goes. Either shoot me a note, leave a comment on this podcast, do whatever you got to do. But until next time, everyone, keep getting after it. Thanks, guys.